Hello and welcome to the M3 Bearcast. My name is Malcolm Traver. In this episode, I'm going to be discussing loneliness, in particular about an epidemic of loneliness that might be due to social media. Then talking about some of the ways and consequences that loneliness plays out on the internet, and then getting into some of our preconceptions about monogamy, community, togetherness. So starting with loneliness, this topic was something that was brewing in the back of my mind after Greg asked me how I was doing after a long period of difficulty in my personal life. I am a caretaker for my mother, and she was not able to find someone who could take care of her personally. So I had to fall into line to help her. And it was difficult at first to find a rhythm, but I did. And I'm doing pretty well personally and professionally. My mental health and self-care are going quite well, but I had to admit that I felt lonely, and I don't know why, but it felt a little difficult to admit. Greg is someone who I can confide in almost anything, but I was thinking about bringing this topic up for the podcast or the live stream and saying, like, I don't know if I really want to talk about this. Kind of feels like I am sad and pathetic, and it's not something I want to admit. But then, as the internet is bound to do, I started watching videos, and other people were admitting their loneliness, and they had plenty of friends and plenty of events that they attended. But when they came home, they were coming home to an empty house. Their dating life wasn't exactly successful, and they felt lonely at times. And I think there's something to this, the way that the internet is allowing us to connect with more people than we can handle. We have all of these loose connections, but a lot of people are lacking in strong, small groups of connections, which seems to provide a certain benefit emotionally and psychologically. And I want to go to this video on TikTok, which led me to a Washington Post opinion article, and it was very insightful. So let me cut to the video and I'll be right back.
Today we're talking about an overarching theory of American loneliness. Reporter Alec McGillis posted this Washington Post opinion article showing that Americans 15 and older are spending a lot more time alone than they did in 2013. And I'll show the full chart. We can see that this started even before the pandemic, moving from 0 hours a week. In 2017, people were spending about 2 hours a week alone, going up to 4 in 2019, skyrocketing to between 8 and 10, 9 hours a week on average alone. And I loved this. Reporter Jill Filopovic, please excuse the pronunciation if I fucked that up. She said, this is bad and one of those things where people are terrible at assessing what will actually make them happy. The dopamine hint of being on your computer feels good in the moment. Building relationships in the real world is so much better for long-term happiness. I'm also an introvert. I need a lot of alone time. The vast majority of human beings, I'm terrible at assessing what's actually best for me in the long term. What feels good in the moment becomes a pattern that is very bad in the long run. It's helpful to understand that being introverted, shy, a loner are real things, but those impulses can be radically magnified by constant entertainment at your fingertips 24/7. And even if that feels good, it's likely not good. And I don't want to turn this into a kind of bashing of people who are introverts or people who are already lonely, but I think that this is kind of causing something that we've been seeing happen over the last 20 years, right? Where as people spend more time by themselves or spend more time on the internet, they have less friends in real life. I spend a lot of time online. I talk a lot about the internet. I've seen what's happening in fandom spaces. People are becoming more aggressive, more myopic, more solipsistic, right? There's a rise in toxic positivity and toxic negativity where people are easily offended. They're easily triggered. They think that triggers are your responsibility. Like you can't say anything that will hurt their feelings instead of managing their own feelings. People are outsourcing their happiness to all of these things, right? People are looking for connection in all of these weird internet sub-communities and nothing is bringing them happiness, but like society is radically being altered by the fact that all of this is happening. And like, is it because we're lonely? No one has done a long-term study of what spending too much time online will do to you, but like a lot of weird shit is going on in society right now. And I think that we're finally finding the cause.
So what's interesting about this topic is that not too long ago, I had a live stream about parasocial relationships. It was from a podcast called The Happiness Lab. I think it's a very good podcast if you're interested in psychology, particularly positive psychology, really figuring out what makes us happy. They had the term parasocial relationships, which is actually going to be my next video. But I was talking about how parasocial relationships, which are one-way relationships with celebrities or authors or just people online that you don't really know, that you've created a relationship to them in the sense that you consume their media, you think you know who they are, you feel engaged whenever you are in communities that are talking about that person, you engage in even some actual social activities around that person. They gave the example of Benedict Cumberbatch. There were these groupies called Cumber Bitches who went out, made fandoms about him, wrote fan fiction. And what they found was that there are social benefits to being part of those sorts of fandoms, especially when you create fan fiction or do something creative around your interest in a person, say like write a parody song or write a story in your favorite author's voice, or, you know, things like that, where you're actually doing something creative and being a part of a community, even though it's just virtual. What this video and what this article is telling us is that sometimes people take it too far and they are actually cutting back on their social relationships. Especially what they were pointing to is the rise of social media in the sense that where people are becoming their own personal celebrities and they are projecting images of themselves that may be hyper fixated on, say, their attractiveness or their success or their knowledge of a certain thing. And they feel somewhat not real, you know, like they know that they're putting on a performance. So even though they're getting this attention and so forth, it's not a real sense of who they are. You know, they understand that people are not praising them for their real talents, and they're not real with these people because there are these loose connections. You know, I think the difference between a loose connection and a real one is that you can be real with those close connections. Like you can be flawed, and the people, while they may judge you, you know, they're not going to run. You know that you're not going to lose them as a friend because you said or did some fucked up shit. You know, you can apologize and they will be around, you know, like there's a back and forth, there's a stability there. But these loose connections, you know, people are thirsty for likes, they're thirsty for attention, and they recognize that their relationships with these people are very fleeting. They come and go, people are fickle, and it can lead to a certain type of loneliness, especially if you're not being yourself online. So I think that's a really major thing. My issue, and I think one shared by a lot of people, is, you know, what if there aren't people in your local area that share your interests? You know, what do you do in those situations? Do you find different interests? Do you expand your circle of friends to things that are not directly interested in, but are close enough? You know, that's one of the things I have been considering myself, is like, what can I get involved in? Like, I know personally, like I would be involved in school activities when I was in school, or, you know, like gaming, which I'm not as much involved in. I actually did a men's choir at one point. I'm not really into singing, but it was a activity I could do every week. Going to the gym is, I mean, somewhat social. I at some point knew the people at my gym and things like that. It is interesting that just meeting people is, you know, being real in front of people has a certain benefit to it. And I really would like to get more info on exactly how lonely people can feel less lonely, especially if they don't have these groups in their vicinity. So, but I think before we can really make some solutions, we have to first admit that there's a problem, recognize it, and be willing to talk about it. So that's the first. So in the next clip, where I said we were talking about parasocial relationships in the previous live stream, this video is from a content creator who I have often posted about for pop media culture criticism. And what she's talking about is a particular artist. I don't even actually know who she's talking about, and it doesn't matter, because in the video she puts a picture on the screen. You're not going to be able to see it in the podcast, so it doesn't really matter who she's talking about, because I don't even know. I think she's talking about Chris Brown, but whatever. a person who people cannot separate the art from the artist. And I was making the point that in my own mind, we aren't supposed to separate the art from the artist. In a sense, a lot of the art and media that we consume is made to feel personal. And we are emotional creatures. And if something an artist creates really is meaningful to us, we will form a connection to the artist themselves. It can be difficult to uncouple that attention from their art. I don't think it really is possible. I think we are in so many areas of our life dismissive of our emotional lives, right? The emotional connections that we have to the media we consume, versus understanding on an intellectual level that this person is problematic, maybe even evil, and that supporting their work is supporting white supremacy, sexism, misogyny, colorism, you name it. There's so many problematic superstars out there who, we talk about there being cancel culture, which I just say that is total bullshit. We call people out. There's a call out culture. Yeah. And, they may go away for a little while and they might, change the way that they are making money online or in theaters or at stadiums or whatever they're doing, whatever their art is. It may change their career a little bit, but they are definitely not canceled. I mean, we stick with them. That's the point that this woman is making. And I want to play the video and I will talk about it again on the other side.
It's become clear to me that when it comes to some of y'all, this man could curb stomp your grandma, put your baby in a dryer, put peppers in your panties, hide your W-2s during tax season, knock your side tooth out, make your engine blow after you just got an oil change. And y'all would still paint him as some innocent boy who made one mistake in 2009 and has been punished for it since. There are also about 5 other celebrities off the top of my head that I could have made this very same video about and it would have been true. And to be honest, realistically, I don't expect most of y'all to be able to withdraw support from somebody that you truly admire or enjoy. Them parasocial relationships be whooping y'all asses, I get it. But that is why the whole separate the art from the artist thing will always be bullshit. It seems that most people cannot simply consume the art of somebody that they enjoy without becoming a fierce protector and defender of that person, even when they've done very horrible shit. And I never hold women accountable for men's wrongs, but it is very interesting to watch some of these celebrity women who have never lent their voices to Meg or Lizzo, women who get attacked by other celebrities too, for no reason. But yeah, let's defend the violent colorist because he can do the fucking moonwalk.
So I think this brings up the idea of, is cancel culture ever going to work? Because I think other people really do want to call out people. They don't want to call it cancel culture. They'll call it call out culture. And they'll try to, basically get people to separate the art from the artist or get their art removed from public consumption, to make it untenable for advertisers to pay them money and to get them off of their feed. I certainly felt this way about Dave Chappelle after his stand-up comedy sketch aired on Netflix. And when I was watching Netflix, his show would keep coming up as a suggestion. I basically had to remove it from the algorithm, like block it or whatever, because it was just annoying me. But I can understand people feeling like, I don't want to see this come up in my space at all, and it shouldn't be in the feed. Like, people shouldn't be laughing at this shit when the sort of jokes that he's telling are actually causing violence against trans people, when it is making this conversation about equality almost untenable within the Black community. It is understandable. However, I think what my understanding of parasocial relationships is such that we are very emotional creatures. I think we often discount the effect that certain comedy or shows or books or events or concerts can have on people, that, those memories are encoded with such positive language that negative thoughts or information about that person then become impossible to encode. I think one of the things I've been mulling over in my head is this idea that people have that we are thinking people with emotions, when I think my paradigm has been, ever since I started researching psychology, mental health, and wellness, is that we are emotional creatures that think. In fact, most of the time when we talk about someone we love or a band or group that is, important to us, whatever information that we come up is just psychological armor to protect our feelings, right? When I got into these conversations about the difference between Apple and Samsung, the information was like about megabits per second and terabytes and gigahertz. And none of that shit actually has anything to do with the way a phone makes you feel when you use it, or how it makes you feel when you pull it out, and other people see you using it, what sort of social cachet you get, what sort of feeling you get when you scroll through your apps, and organize your things, your daily experience with the phone has nothing to do with all these little digital bits and bytes that we will sometimes use to defend or justify our use of the phone to someone who's on the opposite side of a phone debate. And we do that with so many other things. If we talk about somewhere we moved, you might talk about the gross income or the median income, how close the schools are to this place or that. And you'll, recite different statistics on crime and, whatever, but none of that has anything to do with how it makes you feel when you live there. Is it a place that makes you feel safe? Is it a place where you feel comfortable? Are you excited about being there? Or do you look around at the landscape and feel like this is a wonderful, beautiful city? Those things are ineffable. And talking about statistics is just armor and bullshit, really. It's confabulation to try to justify the way you already feel. And if it's one mission of mine, I want to cultivate a space for myself, for my friends, for M3, where we can be honest about how we feel and we can just say, I like it. And that's enough. I don't need to go into why I like it and justify it. Like, you just like it. You like it. I love it. Do you, be you. And for real, it is astonishing on how many issues this comes up over and over again about how our emotions are driving our consumption, or how our emotions are driving our decisions, right? And we're just unaware of it. And this is one of the things that, if you don't accept the emotions that you have about a certain thing, those emotions will control you outside of your awareness. And you'll think that it's based on some confabulation that you created and that you're in control of it, when in truth be told, there's something deeper underneath the surface that is the true reason for the things that you do. So my final topic today, I'm going to be talking about monogamy and sort of the myth of monogamy in previous generations. So there's this video, young woman was just talking about her grandparents and how a lot of people felt that monogamy was the cornerstone of Black success in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But in reality, men were out there cheating on their wives, having side families. Men were not prioritizing women's pleasure, and monogamy was never really real, in the sense that people put it up on a pedestal, but they weren't actually practicing monogamy. There's a wink and a nod to people who had children outside their family. Of course, even if they didn't have children, they were probably having several girlfriends. At least men were. Women's sexuality was highly policed and was devastating if women were found out to be cheating. So this is something I think we often understand. And I think in the gay community, there is a lot of debate about polyamory versus monogamy, in the sense that a lot of gay men feel that monogamy is kowtowing to heteronormative structures, and so I think a lot of gay men will feel that being polyamorous or having open relationships is preferable. And I'm not one to disagree with them. I feel that open relationships, if that is what the partners involved want, is good. And I don't like the idea of moralizing to say that in either direction, because it can actually happen in that way. Gay men will say that people who practice monogamy are being old fashioned, and those who practice monogamy will say the polyamorous people are hoes and can't have any self-discipline. And I think, to me, the biggest point is going back to a level of honesty that we just don't seem to have with one another about the fact that monogamy is good for some and not good for others. Let me play the video and I'll talk about it on the other side.
You know how back in the day, grandmama and granddaddy was together forever, like 100 years, and they were both so content and they lived happily ever after? You know, that monogamous utopia? Guess what? It didn't exist. In the good old days, men fathered side families and side families with little to no paternal support. Oh, and in the good old days, women reported barely having orgasms, if ever at all. Anecdotally, my grandparents were together for over 30 years and are still together, but the emotional unavailability, lack of emotional support, and deception that took place between them created generational wounds that us grandkids are still trying to figure out. When we think of Black Wall Street and upwardly mobile Blacks of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, we think monogamy was the cornerstone of their success. No, community support and community unity was the cornerstone for their success. They succeeded in spite of monogamy, not because of it. At the end of the day, humans are social communal creatures. So our utopia is going to be a social communal one, not a privatized capitalistic one. And dare I say, that might just apply to getting your freak on as well. I don't know.
We have a tendency to believe that our morality is universal, that we don't think of it as something that is circumstantial. And I believe that this video kind of illustrates that point. Is in the previous eras where sexuality was highly regulated, people had a more laissez-faire attitude toward cheating because that's what allowed marriages to survive. It's what allowed men to stay married and stay sane. And women understood this. It was it was an understanding that this is how marriage worked. But people were marrying much more for social and financial reasons than for love and connection. And I think about like the stability of communities and relationships, when people knew that they were going to have the income of their father in the home and their mother doing the labor to keep the house working, or if the women were working, if both parents were working, the sort of stability it meant to have a 2-income home, to build a nest egg that you could depend on, that people weren't going to leave no matter what their sexual proclivities might be. You might not even be heterosexual, that's a real fine point to put on it, that homosexuality was so denigrated that it was almost a death sentence in certain communities for certain people. If they were to come out, they had nothing, so they got married, they had kids, and they did their shit in secret. Now that we don't live in that milieu, if we don't live in that culture, what is it? Why are we holding up the morality or the monogamy of previous cultures, of previous generations, to the situation that we find ourselves in now? And, the situation we find ourselves in now is that maybe we should marry for money. Think about some of the hard times that people are going through right now, and having relationships that are based on stability might be something people would be interested in. But let's remember that time is gone, right? We can't really roll back the clock. People are looking for satisfaction, sexual satisfaction, in their relationships. So what does that mean for monogamy and polygamy or open relationships? I think that means that we can't be ashamed if we need something outside of our relationship. And that means if you are monogamously minded, You have to be clear about that, but also don't shame people who aren't. And I think vice versa would be the case. If you know you're the type of person who needs extra outside of your relationship, let someone know that up front. Now, I do believe in the idea that if you're going to do a polyamorous relationship, that maybe you should start off being monogamous, or at least socially monogamous to a certain degree, like, establishing this person as your primary partner and then slowly working in other partners as your foundation is established. I mean, that's just how I see it. I've never actually participated in either monogamous or non-monogamous coupledom for very long. So I can't say it works either way. But from what I've observed, that seems to be the structure that a lot of people work with and seems to work. But yeah, like the honest conversation about open relationships needs to include the fact that monogamy makes people feel safe, especially if they have experienced relationship trauma in the past, if they have anxious attachment styles, if they're worried about their partner cheating on them, it doesn't make any sense for them to open up the relationship. Like, that's just salting a wound. And recognizing that while it may be more difficult to find that person, it is going to be much more satisfying. So that also means, like, if we can't lean on these sort of social relationships that we had in the past for stability, there needs to be some other form of community support for each of us if we're not living in stable monogamous relationships, stable socially monogamous relationships that look monogamous on the outside and are stable in the sense that people are not getting divorces because of sexual infidelity. So what does that look like? Is that like friends who form families? I mean, that is something people in the gay community did, making houses for those who are homeless and, keeping people in, calling people gay family, and making a way for people who would normally be living on their own so that they don't have to face the same sort of expenses that would come from being single. I mean, that's something real. And I think just in general, having more support in our community, right? For finding jobs, finding relationships, finding groups to be a part of, and that not always be about sex. I don't know about that, because in the gay community, it's always about sex. And I might have to do another topic on that completely because, someone like myself who is very anxious about sex sometimes, like I definitely want to get involved, but at the same time, when people are being so overtly sexual in, say, clubs and bars or events or whatever, it just kind of like squicks me out, a little bit. Just like, it's like, going to a nice restaurant and seeing like the floor is sticky and the tables are messy, and it's just like, I know the food is good, but it kind of squicks me out sometimes. And that may be just like my own lingering like homophobic enculturation or whatever, I still have some deprogramming to do. But yeah, it would be nice if there were more community outlets that were not so overtly sexual and, still welcoming of our sexuality. And I mean, that's what we have in common as gay men. But yeah, I don't know. What does a strong gay community look like outside of, relationships and sexual, clubs or so forth? I don't know. But that is a topic for another day. If you didn't know, all these topics are ones that I have found on TikTok. I bring them to the panel for the M3 Live broadcast every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. If you want to be a part of the live stream and bring us questions and comments while we record, go to youtube.com/mailmediamind, subscribe, hit the bell, and you'll be notified when we're going to go live. I usually schedule the live streams about 24 hours in advance, so you should be able to see that a little bit before we go live. And thank you so much for listening to the M3 Bearcast, and I will see you in the next episode.